kingdom of heaven is extremely passionate, if I can say it that way, extremely passionate about anything that does not mimic heaven on earth. It wants to disrupt. It wants to flip upside down. It wants to change. It wants to remove. By nature, the kingdom of heaven is disruptive. I mean, take a look at the cross, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. How many would agree that was extremely disruptive? It changed the centuries of captivity, centuries of impossibility to be in right standing with God. And the cross and the resurrection disrupted that entire narrative and created an entirely new narrative. So there's something about disruption that I want us to camp on tonight. I want you to take this word very personally for yourself, for your realm of influence, for your family, for your church, your business, whatever context that you currently have. But I want you to take this word very seriously, because the nature of the kingdom actually is designed to disrupt anything that is evil, that is demonic, that does not look like heaven. The prayer that Jesus prayed, let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, is potentially, if not the most dangerous prayer ever said out loud. Because what was set in motion was disruption from the moment Jesus said it, and it had been disrupting ever since. And the more pressure to try to squash the gospel, the more pressure to try to silence it, it becomes even more disruptive in nature. This is the one faith that has lasted the test of time, that has lasted the trial, that has lasted war, dictators, bad theology. I mean, let's talk about that for a moment. The fact that the gospel is thriving in the midst of really bad theology proves the strength of the gospel. So we are actually in something that's extremely disruptive. Gamaliel, after Jesus died and the disciples, the apostles are exploding, the early church is just doing phenomenal things, and the religious leaders are like, man, we gotta silence these guys. They're disrupting our religious world. And Gamaliel, the wise one, pops and says, guys, listen, if this is of God, you best get out of the way. But if it's of man, it will fall apart on its own. Yeah. And here we are thousands of years later, and the thing is still moving at a speed that is unprecedented. Salvations are happening like never before in Europe and all over the world. Things are happening. Miracles are taking place at a rate that is astounding. It is stunning, and it's a privilege to be alive today because the kingdom of heaven is disruptive in nature. You look at history. Martin Luther King was a disruptive man. But the fact that we have to look at, sometimes the word disruption, we have this feeling that it needs to be done with anger, it needs to be done with violence or hatred, or some type of just mean face and run hard. That's not the disruption I'm talking about. The disruption I'm talking about is done with thoughtfulness. It's done with peace. It's done with poise. And it's done with precision. Jesus Christ demonstrated a type of disruption that just blew the minds of the day, and it continues to blow our minds today. He was the one guy that could say one line and completely stop centuries of thought and end it right there in that moment. He didn't have to throw one punch. He didn't have to essentially get mad and start punching people. He simply would make one comment, and centuries of religion would stop in his footsteps, and it couldn't go any farther because of one line. Talk about precision. Talk about articulation. Jesus took the time to articulate, to be thoughtful, to be precise. He did it with peace, and he did it with poise. That's the crazy part. He did it with such poise. And my dream is that the church continues to be a disruptor, but not with anger, malice, hatred, bitterness, resentfulness, but done with peace, thoughtfulness, poise, and precision. Martin Luther King was the disruptor. Here's a man that grew up in the South in America. In a time I actually went to visit his house, and one of the most incredible things that I learned that on his side of the street, it was middle class. He had actually brought up in a very well-to-do home. Across the street, his road that he lived on was actually the line that separated middle class from poverty. And he actually would wake up every morning and go to school, and he'd look across the street and he would see an injustice. He would see something that wasn't right. As a young boy, he didn't know what to make of it, but as he got older and as he got more mature, he began to understand the social dynamic, the racial dynamic, the economic dynamic, and all of a sudden you have a man that was refined by his surrounding, and he was refined by something he saw that wasn't right, and he became a voice for a generation that didn't have a voice. He ultimately disrupted an entire system And what happened in the end? He was killed for it. That's the interesting thing about disruption. If you do it so much so, sometimes culture doesn't know what to do with you. Same thing happened with Jesus. They could not handle this guy. He disrupted so much. I remember the day that Steve Jobs died, which some of you might be surprised by that, but I remember crying when Steve Jobs died. And then I remember trying to figure out, why am I crying about Steve Jobs dying? I've never met the guy. I've been in the same city as him, but that's about as close as I've been to him. But I was like, why am I could take you to the spot in the office, in our church office. I could take you to the very place I was standing. I left the meeting, I came around the corner, and a staff member popped out of the office, and Eric, Steve Jobs just passed away. I remember standing there actually beginning to cry. It wasn't a sobbing weep, but tears came out of my eyes. I'm like, I have no idea why I'm crying, but obviously that hit me. Why? Because Steve Jobs disrupted an entire industry that changed our lives today. He actually did something. In 1984, he came out with a commercial. If you've not seen this commercial, I encourage you to YouTube it at some point tonight. 1984 Super Bowl commercial. In America, we have American football, and the championship game is called the Super Bowl. My dad does not watch the football game. He watches the game just to watch the commercials. Because the commercials are really what the game's all about. I forget what the cost per minute, but it's multi-millions of dollars for like 30 seconds to air a commercial at a football game. So everybody put their best marketing team together, and the commercials are hilarious and funny. But in 1984, Steve Jobs came out with a commercial that pretty much was a message to going to disrupt an entire computer industry. And literally, Steve Jobs did that, and it impacted lives since then in a very unique way. Amy Semple McPherson, let's talk about her for a moment. She was a controversial revivalist of her day because she communicated the message of the gospel in a medium that was not okay to do so. While the church is arguing about, can we play cards? Can we play a game of cards? She's over here putting on theater and telling the message of the gospel. And she's doing it in a format that was extremely offensive to its time and day. She was able to build one of the most phenomenal church facilities in the middle of the Great Depression. Here's a woman that had vision, had faith, and she wanted to reach a generation. She disrupted church as we know it. Today we celebrate her, but back then she was not as celebrated as she is today. See, most disruptors in history are often not celebrated in their time. It's not until they're done and long gone, then we look back and say, thank you for doing what you did, because now we're living in the blessings of it. So that is one of the flip sides of being a disruptor. You might not be fully embraced now, but if things are done well and you disrupt things rightfully so, then guess what? You will be a hero someday. So Amy Semple McPherson disrupted an entire industry. Rosa Parks, elderly black lady that refused to give up her seat on the bus. She said, I am so sick of this white collar line. I'm done with it. And she said, I ain't moving. Little did she know she would become an icon. She would become a cultural, national, international icon of someone that disrupted a system. Who knew that giving up a seat on a bus would just kick a whole bunch of people off? What was it doing? It was unearthing evil in a system that had to be unearthed. It had to be revealed, and that's what disruptors do. They reveal something that is evil, but sometimes it's under the surface, and you don't know it until that person comes along and touches it. And Rosa Parks was that woman. Did she know? Did she know what she was doing? I think she was retired, just wanted to sit down. So I don't know if she woke up that day thinking, how can I bring this entire thing to its knees? I don't know if she thought that, but she essentially did. Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill is another phenomenal disruptor. And based on what I've read and watched and heard, he wasn't extremely celebrated in his day. He was quite controversial. Would that be accurate? The guy was rough. He was crass. He was just sharp edges everywhere. He had no smoothness about him. But he was used by, I believe, by the Lord to disrupt a thought process that would not solve the problem. So Winston got in there and just kind of threw his elbows around. And we all should be going, thank you, Winston, including America. I mean, Winston Churchill disrupted life as we know it. You know, thanks to Netflix, I hate watching TV. The other day I was in my hotel room and I'm watching a TV show and a commercial came on. What is this? Why is there this little commercial? Oh, I'm watching TV. Netflix is training me not to watch commercials anymore. I mean, Netflix has rewrote the rule. Like, I want to watch the TV show when I want to watch the TV show, not when the network wants me to watch the TV show. Netflix disrupted an entire industry and continues to do so today. Sean Parker. How many have never heard of Sean Parker? You should thank Sean Parker on some level for digital music that you have on your phones. Sean Parker developed a software system called Napster. Now, whether you agree with it or not, it's not the point tonight. It was illegal file sharing. It was a system that basically pirated music to millions of people. But what did he do? He introduced an idea that was way ahead of his time, and honestly probably unethical in many ways, but he disrupted something, and you and I, somebody said, we can't do it that way, we've got to do it a different way. Well, what did he do? He disrupted something. In the 14th century, Gutenberg developed the printing press, his version of the printing press. That was a game changer. That printing press changed the entire game. It actually did something phenomenal that you and I today consume mass information so freely and at will, and it can be traced back to this printing press, something archaic to us now, but in its day was beyond its time. I want to read you a little extra regarding the printing press. 14th century, in Renaissance Europe, the arrival of a mechanical, movable type printing introduced the era of mass communication, which permanently altered the structure of society. Imagine doing something that completely altered the structure of all of society. The relatively unrestricted circulation of information and revolutionary ideas transcended borders, captured the masses in the Reformation, and threatened the power of political and religious authorities. The sharp increase in literacy broke the monopoly of the literate elite on education and learning and bolstered the emerging middle class. One of the first mass publications on the printing press was the Bible. And once the Bible was translated into German and mass printed, it took the elite of a religious system and flipped everything upside down. Talk about disruption. Talk about it changed the game, not just the religious system, but all of a sudden mass people were able to have a personal relationship with God because they were able to read the scriptures in their homes, in their living room, instead of having to go to someone that would tell them because they're the only ones that understood the original language. So this printing press, all of a sudden, mass changes an entire system of how we consume information. Pretty phenomenal. Tonight I want to go into a story in John chapter 8. And we're going to study a moment in Jesus' life that I think was, his whole life was disruptive. I think that's easy and fair to say. But I want to take a look at this story because there's some things in this story that continue to move me deeply. I heard Tim say this morning, this is the story that he loves, and I want to do a little bit of talking about tonight. But before we read the first verse of chapter 8, chapter 7 is important to understand what's happening leading up until this point. To summarize the end of chapter 7, let's just say Jesus had a rough day at the office. Let's just put it that way. He was incredibly dishonored. You can read the last verse of chapter 7. They answered and said to him, "Are you also from Galilee? Search and look, for no prophet has arisen out of Galilee." So Jesus had a rough day in the office where he was not embraced, he was not received, he was accused, he was ridiculed, he was embarrassed, and he was mocked. So he had a rough day at the office. But look what he does at the end of chapter 7, and let's go right into chapter 8. And everyone went to his own house, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Now, why did Jesus go to the Mount of Olives? This was the place he would go to refresh, to recover, and to pray, and to spend time alone with his Father. So if you can imagine, he had a rough day at the office, and then he'd go to the Mount of Olives, go to a place of retreat. And this is the place that he spends time with his Father, and he gets refreshed, but I also think he got some fire. He got like, okay, what am I going to do tomorrow? And Jesus was so strategic in what he did. I am convinced that Jesus didn't just randomly choose to do these random things. And one of them we're going to look at tonight. I think Jesus was strategic, like the whole idea of making mud and spitting in the ground and making mud and putting on a blind guy. I think before Jesus came to earth, he had a little time to think of all the ideas that he was going to implement in his ministry. And one of them was, hey, God, I got this idea. What if one time I spit in the ground and I make mud and I wipe it on a guy's eye? And Michael and Gabriel are like, that's brilliant. Totally do that. That'll be mess them all up. I think Jesus had this little file and he had all these ideas of what he was going to do. And he was just creative like that. And so Jesus, I think what we're about to read, he actually does something. But I think, this is Eric's obviously opinion, I think he was saving for the moment. So Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Now early in the morning, he came again into the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. When they had set her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. This wasn't before the act. This wasn't after the act. This was in the middle of the act. I have two questions right there. What were they doing there? And where was the guy in the story? Well, that's another conversation. Verse 5. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what do you say? Let's stop right there. So Jesus is at the Mount of Olives. He's praying, and then he comes down, and it's the word early actually means very early. So Jesus had a very early church service. I'm going to just say, let's say 6 a.m. Who knows? But it's early. We have an 8 a.m. service back home, and that's early for us. We think the most spiritual people go to the 8 a.m. service. And Jesus had a very early church service. So Jesus comes in, has a church service. It's a temple setting, so I'm just going to try to modernize it, help us understand the setting. I want you to picture with me in this room right now. We're sitting in a temple. If you allow me to just bend it a little bit. We're sitting in a temple, and you're being taught by Jesus. And in the middle of the message, the back doors fling wide open abruptly. It wasn't subtly, it was abruptly. They fling these doors open, and they drag this woman, not any pastor from this room. This is a pastor from another place in another town. But they drag this woman into the middle of the meeting and throw her at the feet of Jesus. Now, I want to propose to you, this woman did not have time to get dressed and take a shower and get dressed and show up. And they caught her in the act. It wasn't like, hey, we've caught you. Why don't you clean up? We're going to take you to see Jesus. I don't think that's how that worked out. They caught her in the act, and they literally grabbed her. So there's a very high chance this woman was fully naked. Maybe had a sheet to grab on the way out the door just to cover herself. So imagine the shame, the guilt, the embarrassment that this woman is enduring all the way from the place she's committing adultery, all the way down the aisle to the front of the people. Now, I want to propose to you, this was not an abnormal occurrence. This was not a weird situation. This wasn't like, what's going on here? This was a cultural norm. This was a cultural norm that anyone that's caught in the act of adultery, this is what you do. You stone them. This is normal. I have a feeling there are moms in the room that day, and their 2-year-old son sitting there, and the mom thinking, I know what's happening. We need to go home now. This was a cultural norm. This is what you do. You stone people. Based on the book of Leviticus, if any man or woman commits adultery, they can be stoned. So the Pharisees throw her at Jesus' feet, and they say to Jesus, hey, Jesus, in the middle of his message, the law says we can stone her because she committed adultery. Now, in verse 7, there's verse 6, and first half of verse 7, then there's the second half of verse 7. Jesus eventually says, if you've never sinned, go ahead and stone her. But he doesn't do that right away. There's this space in between verse 5 and the second half of verse 7. Jesus stoops down. We have to ask the question, why would Jesus stoop down in this moment? Why didn't he just go directly to the answer? Why didn't he just respond with, hey, can we stone her? Jesus said, well, if you've never sinned, go ahead and stone her. He doesn't do that. He creates space in the moment. He creates time. He creates a break in the moment. He's trying to interrupt the story. Let me propose to you, he is about to disrupt the entire moment. And he simply does it by getting down on the ground. He doesn't throw a fight. He doesn't make a big scene. He simply does something so unconventional, so unorthodox, it's like it doesn't make sense. And he gets down and he stoops. And then he takes it to another level. He just starts to draw on the sand. Now, people argue about what did he draw. I've actually read some people think he drew the faces of the Pharisees. I'm like, I don't know how you got that, but okay. Some people say he drew the name. Some people drew a line. Again, it's all over the place. I think he played tic-tac-toe. I think he played a game. And I think he was so caught up in his game, and he sits there and he stoops down and begins to draw in the sand. If you look in the Bible, it said, and they continued to ask him the question, The word continued actually means to be persistent, to go for a while, not stop. Now I want you to picture this. A naked woman, partially naked on the ground, about to lose her life. Moms are running with their 2-year-old because they don't want them to experience a cultural norm yet. And everybody in the room is like, yep, we've seen this before. Some of the older people in the room are like, oh yeah, every few months this happens. Don't worry about it. This is normal. Don't worry about it. This is part of our church service. There's the worship, the offering, and the stoning. Like, this is what we do. That's how it was from a cultural perspective. And Jesus in the moment stoops down and he begins to draw, and they're hounding him. Jesus, can we stone this woman? Can we stone her? Let me ask the question, why would Jesus stoop down in this moment? He is trying to stop the mob of condemnation. He's trying to stop the momentum of judgment that's coming at this woman. He is not dealing with just a moment. He's dealing with centuries of stonings. He's dealing with centuries of women that have been stoned for this very act. He is stepping into the middle of a momentum. This is normal. This is what we do. And he wants to reintroduce a new way of doing things. So he stepped into the middle of the timeline. And he interrupts the narrative. And he makes this comment. He said, well, if you've never sinned, go ahead and stone her.